This text is an address delivered by Walter Leslie Wilmshurst to the Lodge of Living Stones in 1929. He argues that Freemasonry is a progressive science of self-discovery, emphasizing the pursuit of truth as central to the Masonic journey. Wilmshurst contrasts belief with faith, asserting that faith is the soul's energetic striving toward an ideal, and that through persistent practice, this faith leads to spiritual sight. He connects this concept to the Masonic symbolism of the all-seeing eye and the restoration of lost soul faculties, proposing that through a process of inner transformation, individuals can transcend the limitations of their senses and achieve higher knowledge. Wilmshurst concludes by encouraging the brethren to embrace the quest for truth, recognizing that it involves not only acquiring new knowledge, but also letting go of existing darkness and preconceived notions. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's presentation From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore. As faith has sometimes been the subject of our discussions, and as we have this practical demonstration of it in our midst as a living force, let me speak a little more fully upon it. Faith stands, as you know, in the forefront of Masonic duties. It is the first and lowest rung of that symbolic ladder of many steps to the heights which is exhibited in every lodge for a Mason's contemplation. In religion, it is the first of a triad of theological virtues. But how comes it that equal importance is attached to it in our system, which is not primarily a religion, but a philosophical adjunct to religion? We must first know what faith is. It differs radically from belief, which is merely a temporary attitude of mind towards a given or supposed fact, and which may change at any moment with a change of fact. Faith, on the other hand, is philosophically the energy of the soul intelligently directed towards an ideal. It is not, like belief, a mere posture of thought. It is the substance of the soul itself in vibratory motion towards a goal. The soul is faithless, without faith, only when it is inert, and its inherent energy remains passive and unstirred. But once stimulated by the revelation of an ideal, by offering it an object for contemplation or adoration, and its latent energy at once streams toward that ideal, like a river to the sea, in an effort to attain union with it, and that energy is its faith. As with every other form of labor, proficiency in faith depends upon intelligent, continuous practice, and it is only the intensified faith of the expert that moves mountains and tears through obstacles. But the persistent exercise of faith is enjoined upon the Mason as important because, and here we come to a real secret of initiation which reveals itself to the experienced, because it is a building force, a constructive energy, and with those who persist in it, there comes a time when, literally and truly, faith passes into sight. It creates for itself an eye. The soul for the first time receives its sight, is restored to light, and becomes rewarded with actual vision of what it has hoped for, and with clear, self-conclusive evidence of things normally unseen. For it is as true in the metaphysical realm of the soul as in physical nature that desire creates faculty. Bodily sight is known to have resulted from persistent nerve straining towards the sunlight by blind organisms for whose welfare sight is a necessity, until, eventually, a definite organ of vision is evolved, and in precisely the same way, the desire energy of the as yet unseeing soul, straining towards the supernatural light it craves for, results at last in generating an eye for itself, a specialized organ of spiritual vision. It is that sight which you see signified in Masonic diagrams by an all-seeing eye enclosed within the square and compasses, and find spoken of in our ritual as the eye which sees all and ought to direct all. It is the faculty of seership which characterizes every real initiate. It is that higher order of vision without which the people perish. This truth used to be well known among Masons. 3 centuries ago, when the privilege of initiation was much more restricted and seriously treated than now, we find them speaking of it and saying, "We have the Mason word and second sight," meaning that by the help of our science, they had acquired, among other advanced power of soul, a loftier quality of intellectual sight, a spiritual clairvoyance, enabling them to behold both things and truths not perceptible to the average man. And so, the first aim of initiation in all ages and systems has ever been to open this inward eye, to restore the candidate to sight, as is done symbolically in our first degree. For, in spiritual as well as in material building work, of what use can a blind man be? If the light within thee is darkness, how great is that darkness? The ceremonial removal of the bandage from the novice's eye, therefore, foreshadows an actual experience possible to him, namely, the removal from his soul's vision of that terribly obscuring hoodwink, the normal, natural mind, which, packed as it is with thoughts, opinions, learnings, and prejudices of its own, forms an impermeable barrier to the passage of supernatural light. Not till that bandage is lowered can we gaze upon the reality which lies beyond mind, and perceive the secret principles, the concealed sacred law of our being and the greater and lesser divine lights appointed to illuminate it. This was the supreme and sublime degree of vision called epipteia, to which the Greek mysteries finally led up, which is called beatific vision in the Christian Church, and which is signified also by the great dramatic spectacle revealed in our Royal Arch degree at the moment of restoration to light. We shall be helped in understanding this by referring to the traditional gnosis, which forms the philosophic basis of the Masonic system. This teaches that the human soul, once fashioned as a reflex and in the likeness of the sevenfold perfection of divine light and glory, has fallen from that higher state and has become so deeply involutionized and enmeshed in the outer darkness and limitations of phenomenal existence that it has now lost awareness of its own grandeur and is suffering grievous arrest and disorder of its native inherent faculties. But that which is lost was destined to be found, to be gradually redeemed from evil and ultimately restored to even greater grandeur than originally, and in the course of our evolutionary recreation through the ages, we have now, in some small measure, recovered from our disorder and loss of faculty, though still falling far short of perfection and possession of our full powers. The extent of our recovery is measured by the present average standard of our racial consciousness. This, as we know, is mainly sensuous. Human knowledge is substantially dependent upon and limited by the evidence brought to the mind by the 5 senses, the chief outlets of the soul in this age, as William Blake called them. For this reason, man in the present age and in his present imperfectly developed state is symbolized in Masonry and cognate systems by the number 5, by the pentagon, the pentalpha or 5-pointed star, and with the same significance, the Pentateuch was compiled as a law for man's sensuous nature, and the number 5 constantly recurs in our craft system. But the 5 senses and their coordinating instrument, the natural mind, useful and necessary working tools as they are for temporal purposes and for searching for higher truth, are nevertheless not organs of true knowledge at all. They are but temporary, nature-provided substitutions for corresponding transcendental faculties now lost to us, but which, it is promised, time and circumstance will restore to us. The time, brethren, for their restoration is now. Those circumstances are present today. They exist whenever a given individual is sufficiently ripe to receive the genuine secrets of his being in exchange for the temporarily substituted ones. And the real initiate is one in whom the restitution of the genuine secrets of his being has taken place. He is a ripened soul, who, by divine help and his own industry, has outstripped the slow evolutionary progress of the race, and, by the recovery of a measure of lost faculty, has, in the psalmist's words, become anointed with the oil of gladness above his fellows. He is one who no longer relies, as they do, upon the faculties of the circumference, but who works with and from the centre of all life. Now, in none of us is that restoration possible until the lesser good is surrendered for the greater, and the shadow renounced that the substance may take its place. Until the senses are mortified and the supremacy of the reasoning mind is deposed, as symbolically is symbolized in the death of our third degree, they constitute an actual impediment to the knowledge of reality, which only then dawns within us as that bright and morning star whose rising brings peace and salvation to the faithful and obedient. Our initiation system exists, therefore, to awaken our dormant, repressed, lost soul faculties to birth and function, and, by due discipline and the practice of faith, the 5 senses becomes not eliminated or abrogated, but raised to a higher power by the superaddition of a transcendent 6th sense, involving a new and higher quality of intellectual sight. The geometrical symbol of the 5-pointed star then gives way to a 6-pointed one, the Seal of Solomon, formed of 2 interlaced triangles in balance, the emblem of the man in whom the material and the spiritual natures have become so equipoised that he is a master of both and can wield either of them with equal ease. May that seal of a Grand Master Mason come to be set upon each of us. There remains, for our final perfecting, the recovery of a 7th faculty, surpassing even that of spiritual sight. But of this it would be premature to speak more than a word. It is the highest and terminal note in the 7-fold scale of our being. It is that 7th day, or Sabbath, which was made for man to enjoy on reaching the summit of his sublime destiny. It marks the end of all Masonic labour. It is the still rest of the centre, that rest attainable even whilst in the flesh, which remaineth for the people of God. In the consideration and personal application of these principles, brethren, lies abundant work for us in the future. So far, we have only made a beginning, by surveying the site, clearing the ground, laying foundations. Even so, we have discovered what wealth of unsuspected and neglected truth lies concealed within our system, waiting to be quarried forth, wrought into due form, and built into living architecture in ourselves. But the quest of truth involves something more than the acquisition of new light for ourselves. It necessitates also liberation from our own existing darkness. We have not only much to learn, but before it is possible to learn it, we may also find much to unlearn and let go. Summa scientia nihil scire. Supreme knowledge comes only when reasoning ceases and thought is stilled. The human mind is naturally tenacious of its settled convictions, not realizing that they are themselves but darkness and obstacles to ultimate truth. And when the latter presents itself, it may do so in aspects that surprise, alarm, and even repel, unless we are content to surrender a lesser for a greater good. As candidates for truth, then, we are called upon to regard ourselves as in the same position as when we first became candidates for admission to the craft, and to submit ourselves to like methods of preparation. Not now symbolically, but actually, we are asked to divest ourselves gradually of our usual thought garments to the point of nudity, and to loosen the shoes of former opinions from off our mental feet. Truth, in its naked clarity, reveals itself only to those who are themselves naked of preconceived ideas of it. And before we are qualified to walk upon its holy ground, it requires us to take off first one and then another old boot of treasured conviction, till no foothold of worldly wisdom remains to us. And, thus prepared, we may follow our guide with firm but humble confidence, by which guide I mean the path prescribed by our order, which will assuredly lead to truth those who faithfully comply with its instructions in their spirit, as well as observe them in their outward form. For a deep dive into the history, philosophy, and traditions of Freemasonry, subscribe to From the Quarries. You will find hundreds of lectures, presentations, shorts, and other Masonic works written by Freemasons for Freemasons. Visit FromTheQuarries.com or YouTube at From the Quarries.